Hi everyone, it's October 26th, 2013. I want to be in an open area while I'm recording, but it's a little bit windy today, and that really wouldn't work for the purposes of recording. It is really that magical hour in the year where everything becomes more crystalline, I guess you could say, like very pristine and nice. We've had a couple of hard freezes, and yet this is probably the best fall that we've had that I can recall since growing up here, maybe in the late 90s. And I think I said that grammatically incorrect. I didn't maybe grow up in the 90s, but that's probably the last time that we had a really nice fall like this. You can see how windy it is. I just want to touch on what Barefoot Sun Gazer was talking about in her last two clips regarding vitamin D, or hormone D as she is talking about it. And really with the Truther Girls video, I think it might have been late last winter when she was talking about how the province of Quebec ended up not really banning the testing of vitamin D, but just not making it available to people in the clinics. I suppose money talks, and you could buy into something like that. And I will have to put on my Facebook status what's going on with that here and see if anybody has had it tested. The US is extremely variable because, as everybody knows, we don't have any sort of comprehensive uniform national health care plan. Most people now, you have two different types of people. The bulk that, maybe 30 or 40% of working adults do not really seek medical care, either through distrust or fear of what it's going to cost. And then you have hypochondriac types who have everything tested, and then their problems compound as they seek more treatment. And then maybe the middle 30% who just kind of go for an annual checkup and don't really ask too many questions. But I'll have to find out what is going on with that here. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about status symbols. And I haven't really touched on this before, which is kind of surprising. But I spend a lot of time thinking about it because I'm getting... Well, it's impossible to avoid projecting some kind of message in how you dress or your activities. Like, even an anti-statement is still a statement. And as I've reintegrated into U.S. American society, I've had lots of little surprises in terms of where things are going. And of course, every corporate community or demographic that you fall under will have different kinds of results and thoughts. I am in a somewhat corporate environment, but in the Midwest, and it's an informal corporate environment with a pretty mildly globalized business. I think I'll actually turn this way to avoid the wind a little bit more. And I've been surprised that cars still seem to be the biggest status symbol around here, and actually almost everywhere I've been, except for in communities of people age 30 and under. I think it becomes more symbolic once people hit their 30s and their careers start going somewhere, or you refuse to go somewhere with it. And I think that's just such a core part of United States culture that it's going to take a while before that really changes. But I really thought that it wasn't as big of a part of our lives as it still is. Oh, this is a little bit treacherous for holding a single handlebar and going down. I've witnessed there's a pretty strong boom in the United States right now of people buying and upgrading cars. And I'm not really seeing any kind of strong statements against that. And I work for a pretty green company, and it's still not quite expressed too strongly to go against that. I don't really want people to hear me right now, so I'm going to go this way again. I think most of the people there are engaging in green practice more than average, but actually not to the extent that I expected. We do have a bike rack, but I only see one or two people using it, and most of the editorial staff lives in a much more progressive town called Lawrence, 30 minutes away from here. So there is commuting going on. And so I've watched a lot of people, and I keep looking at the cars that people are driving and the age of the people driving them, and ethnicity to some extent, and it's just all very interesting. And you can't just tell by watching somebody drive what they do professionally, but and then I also can't say for sure if this affects or has the same kind of patterns in Europe or Asia. When living in South Korea, I really see no practical reason to have a car there. The infrastructure is so efficient and thorough that really you could be anywhere you needed to be in no time, even in quite remote places. And investments in high-speed rail, both above ground and then concentrating on hubs or express trains underground. You just really couldn't ask for a better arrangement, truthfully. And yet people do need to buy cars in order to project a certain message. And among that, I think of the pastor's wife who is my boss. And she drove a black Ecus, which is sort of like, again, I don't know an equivalent of that in Europe, but in the United States it would be like driving a black Lincoln Town Car in the 80s or 90s, and maybe a black Buick in the decades before that. Just very, very much a status symbol, a high status symbol. And now, with so many transformations going on in the US, it's not really clear what you would buy to project power, and it's constantly changing. As a rule, if you, in all the countries that I've been to, a foreign car hinting at tariffs and a higher cost is associated with wealth. In Korea, like, you would always see the domestic cars in the suburbs and just generally in like blue collar areas. And then once you would get to the elite areas, I used to teach in the second wealthiest area of the country, well, second or third. It would be more BMWs and Mercedes, that sort of thing. And generally, if you want to project power or some kind of intrigue, black is a status color, and then silver is associated with conservatism, and then red with daring. And I don't know about in other countries for this either, but it used to be said here that it costs more to insure a red car because the personalities of people driving cars that color are more intense and prone to risk. And again, like, cars are selling like crazy. It used to be somewhat on the flip side. Not all foreign cars were associated with status. They could also be associated with like a cheap sellout kind of route to take. And over time you see each brand and associated country become legitimized. And I said this years ago. I can remember towards the tail end of my teenage years that Kia, Hyundai, the two Korean brands, and then to some extent Nissan from Japan were considered sort of like cheap alternatives to a domestic brand. But I knew once the recession hit, and then with the kind of warranties that the Korean cars were, or the Korean makers were offering, they would get a stronger foothold. And sure enough, a neighbor of mine from Detroit, or not really from Detroit, but that area, bought a Hyundai. And I think that basically the manufacturer location and setup is almost the same now. It's not distinct, but this is sort of like the Hyundai Sonata or some of the sedans from Korea and Japan have become status symbols of people who have sort of hit their professional zenith and want to project some kind of stability and quality, and the designs are more in line with projecting that image too. But it's surprising to see that change. Then I have noticed that if we're talking about people who really are discreet about their wealth, but they want to quietly show that they are doing well or be beyond reproach by American domestic brands, and the prices for these cars have gone up considerably in this crash period. And I have heard some people say that the Ford line is retaining its value because among somewhat astute people, or people who think of themselves as astute, that brand retains a certain value because they did not receive bailout funds, at least on the surface or on balance sheet. So that's sort of an interesting thing going on. And I just don't really know. And then in my own case, I have currently and still a car that I bought my senior year of high school. A silver Toyota Corolla that I paid about, well, the sticker price was $7,000 for a 1999 Toyota Corolla in 2002. And it has all sorts of problems with it. I basically cannot leave the city safely. It gets me to work and back and within a 5-mile radius of my house. It could probably do more, but I consider that very high risk. It's rusted out on the backside. A couple of people have hit it, one during an ice storm and another just a fender bender on the road. And I just didn't pursue anything with them because I don't want to give somebody a hard time. And I think things like that, like overreacting, drive up insurance costs. But I know that savings-wise and past earning history-wise, I have done well, but I wonder what people think I'm projecting exactly. If it's stingy, if they think that I'm bluffing about what my real circumstances are, if it seems like laziness, I'm not really sure what that's projecting. Actually, I think it's a little bit of all of those things. I think it adds to the mystery, and that's partly what has kept that in play for a while. And I also feel like I'm doing something good for the environment by reducing my travel. And well, another thing that's kind of changed too, speaking of cars, as it used to be, because I've done a little bit of research on this, a Volkswagen was considered a no-nonsense, no-frills, somewhat progressive left type of car. But I think they have gone more to like the type of person you see driving it is more middle management now. And I've observed that closer to me. they're usually people who are earning more, but it's a car that is not as expensive as, again, some of these domestic brands that have risen in their status power in the last 5 years. And so I just wonder how much longer this system will be in place and where that will go. If you've ever read Margaret Atwood's books of this trilogy that's just wrapping up, the Mad Adam series, the Oryx and Crake series, she kind of went the dystopian way again. This is where all the butterflies were a few weeks ago. But as you can see, the frost kind of hit this open area, so they've had to move on. I think they're more in Texas or maybe even Mexico by now. In the Margaret Atwood series, the status symbols of this time period, like 10 years into the future from now, became eating animals that were extremely rare and exotic and had endured some very bad suffering. And the arts were not honored in any way unless they were used to achieve political propaganda ends. And I can't say that I necessarily see it going that way. I'm hoping, in my case, to sort of rearrange that paradigm a little bit and try to steer people to think that a true status symbol is to be able to choose the job that you want and be where you want and just be sort of aloof about the power structures and just laugh off a lot of the stuff that's happening, but at the same time be aware of it and know how to face it. And yet, I think I will be making a purchase like that soon. If the promotion that has been proposed to me and that I'm negotiating about goes through. So it's just it's all projecting, it's very interesting. And the last thing I want to address about all of this is it has disturbed me to be in a position to manipulate these kind of factors in an authentic way, but in such a way that you can convey messages and sort of arrange things. It has bothered me that it's such an insurmountable task to be able to distribute that to everyone. I escaped a lot of what I escaped the downturn of Western countries through the 2008 and beyond crisis because I knew it was coming, and I took the necessary steps in my case to out-earn it and escape it by going to Asia, which I don't think that strategy would be necessary now. for me or a lot of other people, things have kind of changed and our expectations have changed. And also their circumstances have changed. But when I did that and I was earning a lot of money relatively and had no material needs, essentially it was never that much of a comfort to me, because I knew that a lot of people that were in the US and elsewhere in Europe could not have that kind of escape plan due to obligations or fears tethering them to here. And I think that unless I'm provoked to a very great extent, the next time that I have any kind of status upgrade, I'm not going to be satisfied unless I'm taking some other people with me. And that's just the way it is. And I hope that those of you who've watched kind of hold me to it. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with this beautiful scene, or at least it is to me. And thank you for watching, as always. Bye.